We know that policy and politics, that those can be powerful, oftentimes contentious terms, but that decisions are being made right now that impact every single one of us, and that we know that artists and arts organizations are essential, both to society and into the lives of citizens, so that artists can be powerful advocates and ambassadors, and that we hope that this conversation is to really dive deep into that and learn from these national experts that we have here on the stage with us today. So with that, want to start our conversation by getting to know our panelists a little bit more, and want to start this off by recognizing Bob Lynch, President and CEO of Americans for the Arts, to share a little bit about himself and his organization.
Great. And how many heard Aaron's talk last night? So almost everybody. So in his talk, he talked about flexibility and risk. And so I see a piano over there, and I'm going to take a risk and play a little something and illustrate how that works with politics and policy. So I started my work in politics in Massachusetts 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, in Massachusetts, half the population was Irish, and half the politicians were Irish. And if you couldn't get through the front door to meet a politician, we had a few of us who played some Irish music, and we would get to play at all of their St. Patrick's parties. And so So every politician would cry at that song. And when politicians cry, and you are able through art and music to move them to tears, they go back and they appropriate more money for the arts. And that's one of the powerful things that you have, because I am probably the least accomplished musician in the room. Every one of you can have a more powerful effect than I just did, and yet I've seen that work again and again, and largely and very often in the best way with Carla, who's been a spectacular artist advocate for many years. So with this, there's supposed to be a PowerPoint up there of some things that I'm going to talk about, policy and politics, and I'm tasked here to do a quick overview of the subject. And what I want to say, first of all, is that I love Sphinx. I love this organization because many of the artists who I have had the opportunity to work with for advocacy have come through contacts in this organization. Starting with Carla, who I met at the Supreme Court and who has been with me lobbying and performing for the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the United States Congress, or a number of other young artists right out of the program who we have taken and sponsored to be at the Council of Foundations, making the case that foundations should be doing more for the arts, or at the independent sector, making the case that the private sector in general should be doing more for the arts. So that's another kind of policy and politics, working with those kinds of organizations, both in the public sector and in the private sector. Now, one of the things that happens is that we are able to take all kinds of artists, like those young artists that you see there, or famous artists, whether it's Lady Gaga or Connie Britton or Yo-Yo Ma or many, many others, and be able to take them to those venues where I get to, or other advocates get to make the case, and they get to illustrate why the case is important. I can talk about arts education, but when a congressman sees something like what these artists can do in front of them, they then want to have more arts education out there. My own organization, Americans for the Arts, is half a century old. It was there at the beginning to lobby for the creation of the National Endowment for the Arts, all the state arts agencies, and the 5,000 local arts agencies in America, and they all appropriate federal, state, and local government money. Main thing to know about our organization is that we are two organizations. A 501c3 nonprofit organization that does all the research and the professional development, and what's called a 501c4 political organization, which has 365,000 citizen members right now and has a political action committee so that we can raise money to then give it out in congressional and senatorial races to pro-arts candidates. So that's a snapshot of who we are. And then I want to say a few words about the topic itself, policy and politics. So both of those words come from the Greek word polis, meaning city-state, like Indianapolis or Minneapolis. And the policy part is the whole ball game. We're trying to get to an end of some sort. We're trying to get something done, whether it's a law or whether it's money. The politics, the meaning of the word politics originally is simply the system to govern a city, the overall system to govern a city. We think of it today from its negative meaning, which is playing politics. Playing politics, all of the backroom games that go on. So policy is like an end, and politics. And then the way that we shape and work, there's a few other words that we use. Advocacy, lobbying, and then the things that help us make the lobbying happen, which is some research, some alliances, and some visibility. Now, those words, let me translate them. How many people here have advocated? How many people here have lobbied? Okay, so here's the way I look at that. A young person wants to get the keys to the car. 16 years old, they want to get the keys to the car. The family policy is, our policy is that you get the keys if you've done all your chores. That's the policy. Now, that's the guiding principle. But the actual end that the kid wants is to get the keys. So one is a guiding principle policy, and another policy is the actual action that happens. So that in Congress, that's a policy that says there can be money for the arts, and there's a law for that. And then there's the policy that says you get $10 this year or $150 million, which is what the NEA budget was last year. So that's policy. The way that we work to get there is we have advocacy. That comes from the Latin, to voice. And the advocacy is that you are generally talking about a value. You're generally talking about the arts being important. You're generally saying, I would like the keys more often to the car. That's an advocacy statement. The lobbying statement is very specific. I want the keys on Saturday night. Lobbying comes from Ulysses S. Grant. When he was president of the United States, he didn't like hanging out in the White House. He liked going over to the Willard Hotel next door. And people who wanted stuff would hang out in the lobbies to try to catch Ulysses S. Grant to get him to do what they wanted. So that's lobbying. Research is obvious. You know, research in this case is all the other kids have the keys. Alliances, people that can help you. You know, Uncle Bob thinks I should have the keys. And visibility. All different kinds of ways of illustrating, showing pictures, doing things that show that this would be a good idea. You put it all together, and it's an endless wheel, an endless circle that ends up at the end of the day with a decision or a non-decision, which is also a decision. And our ability as citizens to participate in that process is something we do every day in our lives, and it's just translating it to the political landscape. So with that, there are just a few quick things that I want to say. This is a piece of art. Not really. What that is this district that you are in right here in Detroit. And it doesn't look like you think a district would look like. You think it would be, you know, a city, a square. But in fact, this is an example of what they call gerrymandering. And that was because Governor Gerry, back in 1810 in Massachusetts, came up with this idea, and somebody said, hey, those districts look like salamanders. And so suddenly gerrymander was convinced. Now, that's the negative side of what you're looking at. The powerful side, back to the research and visibility point that I made, is that in this one congressional district, there are way more arts-related businesses, for-profit and nonprofit, 1,481, and more people employed, 9,915, than anybody thinks, specifically that congressperson. And we have the ability to take this down to any zip code area, so it can be Congress, state, or whatever. This slide simply shows where the money comes from. You see the blue, that's earned income. That's where most of the money for the arts comes from, all the money for the for-profit arts. And the green and the blue and the yellow on the right there, that at the bottom, that's private sector, that's 30%. And then 9% at the top, that's public, federal, state, and local. But I just want to make this case. If you are earning the money, you're selling. That's called marketing. If you are privately working on getting the money, you're selling, and that's called development. And if you are publicly working on the getting of the money, that's selling, and that's called advocacy or lobbying. It's all the same skill set, so it's important to know that. Now, on the national stage right now, Americans for the Arts and our colleague arts organizations across the country are working on 4 big policy areas, 4 big ends that we're trying to get to. The first one is money, appropriations. The second one is tax reform, and we got a lot of work to do on that one. The third one is a law to try to get artists and entrepreneurs more help so that they can be entrepreneurial with some assistance from things like the Small Business Administration. Aaron talked a lot about that last night. And the last one is arts education. So those are the 4 big areas that we're looking at. A word on the money, though. This graph here shows the trends over the last 20 years of the federal, the state, and the local money. The federal is at the bottom, and that, as I said, was $150 million. However, the whole pot there, if you put everything that exists, federal, state, and local government out there, is about $6 billion a year coming to the arts in one form or another. We show about $1.5 billion of it there through the distribution agencies. This slide, maybe you can't see it all that well, but you can see that everything in yellow, that's the different money pots at the federal level that are the policies that we're trying to get. The top one is the NEA at $150 million. That's what we had 2 years ago. The president, back in January, last January, wrote terminate for each one of them. Terminate, 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 0, 0, all in pink. You can see that. After a year of advocacy and lobbying and a united effort of the things that I just talked about, the skill sets, we've got all that money back. All the money in the Senate, $150 million, and the House has voted for $145 million. No one person does that. No one organization does that. No one issue does that. And so one of the things that this slide shows is some 30 different community aspects, each of which benefits from the arts. You know, a long time ago, I used to think when John Gardner, the great leader of the independent sector, used to say, there's 10 big things that we have to think about that are important to community, and the arts weren't in them. And I talked to him once, and he said, well, you know, the arts are in every one of them. They're in the economy. They're in health. They're in hunger. They're in community development. You just have to make that case, and that's what this wheel tries to show. And that's why we spend a lot of time on issues that decision makers say are number one, like economic impact. So the value of the arts, the beauty of what I'm hearing here from the artists, that's one thing. What it does for jobs in the economy is another. You put it all together, and we put a big human investment into the arts last year, and it uses artists. You can see there Kerry Washington, Bob Redford, John Legend, business leaders, the head of the conference board on the far left, and the 2 congressmen on the far right, both gone now, when we actually did this particular session, was in the good old days when the top Democrat and the top Republican would stand next to each other. The visibility, we did some 200 different ads that would appear in newspapers, in magazines, not just in Washington, D.C., but in the districts of the actual decision maker. So that any time a person who reads this paper every day, The Hill from the United States Congress, would get this, they would see this. The arts create jobs, or the arts are good for the economy, etc. And when they would go home, like the head of appropriations, Congressman Ferlinghuysen from New Jersey, the top person, would read his home paper, he would see this. the National Endowment for the Arts helps our communities thrive. And so that's part of the pathway to policy and ultimately the overall political system. Partnerships, last thing I want to talk about. We put it all together with people. Some of the hardworking folks are here in the room, the League of American Orchestras, the Chamber of Music America, Chorus America, and people who helped with aspects of the research and so on, like the Mellon Foundation or the Duke Charitable Trust. And so with that, last quick illustration. I saw in the packets this wonderful work about composers and protecting composers. And there's a law that we work on right now called the Artist Museum Partnership Act. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but the Artist Museum Partnership Act says that artists should have the same right as a collector when it comes to a piece of art that they hold in terms of deduction. And so here's an example. If Carla does a score of something and a libretto, and she has these two beautiful manuscripts, and she sells one and keeps one, and one of you buys it, buys the one for $10,000, and then some time goes by and it's worth $500,000, and the other one's worth $500,000 too. When you, the collector, donate it, you get $500,000 or whatever deduction. When Carla donates hers, she gets $5 maybe for the paper and the ink that went into it. We want to change that, and that's what we work on. So can you make a difference as an artist? Absolutely. Here's a few things to think about. The election of Thomas Jefferson, the beheading of Charles I of England, the right for women to vote in the United States. What do they have in common? One vote. They all happened by one vote. Just like the majority Republican or Democrat of the state of Virginia just happened 2 weeks ago, one vote, and it switched to one party. Arts are important. You are important. You are powerful more than you know, and you are not alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much.
Wanted to hand the mic off to introduce herself to Carla Canales. She is an internationally known opera musician, and she also is the CEO and founder of the Canales Project. So would you share a little bit about your work?
Well, good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be back with Sphinx. I will forever be grateful to this organization because a few years ago, I was fortunate to receive the Sphinx Medal of Excellence. And that I just want to share this story a little bit with you because it was that moment that really changed my life. And among the many things that came from that moment, I had the chance to meet Bob and become involved with Americans for the Arts. This organization does wonderful things for so many musicians, but in terms of my story and what I'd like to share with you today, winning that award came at a moment for me where I had been in my business for over a decade, had absolutely no reason to complain, was singing a lot of opera all over the world, primarily the role of Carmen, but I was increasingly hearing voices in the back of my mind, and one question kept coming to the forefront, which is, who do I serve? What is it for? Going and singing a great performance, a great classical work can be very rewarding for a musician, but I didn't always feel at the end of the day that what I was doing was necessarily making the world a better place. And so from that moment of winning the Sphinx Medal of Excellence, I actually decided to use that as the impetus to explore that question. And my first step in that process was to sit down with people and ask these questions out loud. And especially to sit down with folks that I would not normally come in contact with. As a singer, I was always around other singers, even in an opera production, believe it or not. We don't often even speak with the orchestra members. And I really felt it was important for me to go out and ask people, what do you think of classical music? How can we do better? When's the last time you went to a performance that had great impact on you? And I did that for really about a year and learned so much. And again, so grateful to Americans for the Arts because they gave me the opportunity to meet so many folks through your conference and your network and ask these questions. And all of a sudden, I started to see things from a very different perspective, which was absolutely artists have tremendous value in society. But unless we get to a place of service, at least for me and for my life and for my time moving forward, I didn't necessarily feel like continuing on the traditional classical trajectory was going to make the social impact that I wanted to see. And that's why I started the Canales Project. Our mission is to give voice to issues of identity and culture through music and through conversation. It's a very personal mission for me, because as I ask these broader questions, I also ask the question of how can I serve? What can I speak to? And it really boiled down to one great desire for me, which ironically taps into your definition of advocate, to voice. I wanted to use my voice as a singer, both literally and figuratively, to make a difference to the causes that I believe are important and to advocate for the things that I believe in. Now, how? That's the big question, right? How do you do that? I could speak about that for far more than the 5 minutes here. But I think in my case, I wanted to start an organization to create that platform, not only for myself, but for a community of artists that I felt were also struggling with these questions and wanted to get involved. A lot of what we do is through partnership, really trying to look at the vastly, huge pool of artists that are out there. I would say there's a tremendous group of, sorry to say, but underemployed, underutilized artists in this country. And yet we have this void, we have this black hole of the intrinsic values that artists naturally bring to the table, whether it's the discipline that it takes to be a classical musician, or the compassion, the imagination, dare I say the empathy. And so that's a business opportunity. And it's one that requires working together and requires working in partnership, and often in partnerships that you would not think of traditionally. A lot of what we do with my not-for-profit is in that fashion. And just to sum it up, I'll give you an example. Last year we started a project which is called Hear Her Song. We're debuting it next March, and it started a year ago in partnership with an organization called Vital Voices. And Vital Voices is a women's empowerment organization. I got to know their CEO, and we were really talking about how can we use the arts to help amplify that message. Again, this was before Me Too, before we were hearing all the headlines that we have today on the news. And they honor women every year. I said, why don't we think about honoring those women through song? And we sort of created a little formula. And I want to boil this down and share it with you to be very specific about an example of how, as an artist, you can use your voice to make a difference. We worked with the women. We asked the women to write short statements, 50 words, 100 words, based on the power of their choices in their life. We selected 20 women, I should say, not just with Vital Voices, but from around the world and in partnership with different organizations. Each of the women responded in this short statement, similar to, if any of you are familiar with the book This I Believe, the NPR essays, sort of similar to that. We then have a poet on our team. The poet took their answers, created poetry that was inspired by their statements, and we commissioned 20 composers and asked each of the composers of all different genres, all female composers, to pay tribute to each of the women by creating a new song in their honor with their words that would help them, as a tool, amplify their message, whether it was getting radio play for the song, singing it in their communities, incorporating it into their work, really using these songs as an anthem. I'm very proud of the project and of the artistic team involved, and we'll be debuting all 20 songs in March. So that, for me, is an example of how can I use my voice, literally and figuratively, to advocate for the things I believe in.
Phenomenal. Thank you. And I have questions, but this is about you. This is an opportunity to connect with two of the leading voices in advocating for the arts and culture across the country. So there are microphones positioned both here and here, and so invite you all to step up to the microphone and ask some questions of these folks. And then if you're not comfortable doing that, if you want to send a message, there's availability on Slido at slido.com, and it's hashtag SphinxConnect to enter into that, and you can ask your questions there, and I'll be reviewing here on the iPad. But yes, if you could say your name too, and where you're from, and then your question.
Hi, my name is Garrett. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I have a quick question about the Artist Museum Partnership Act. How is the fair market value of the property determined? Who are those people, and what does that process look like?
So that particular law, and I got to think about it because I saw that you had some wonderful composer material in the handouts today, and trying to urge that side of the artistic process here. They look to appraisers, certified appraisers, to appraise these documents. But you've hit on exactly why the law is the way it is right now. Because up until 1964, I think, you could, as an artist, deduct the market value, and it meant going and getting an appraisal, and it meant that the IRS had to trust that appraisal. And forces that felt they didn't want to rely on that trust said, let's reverse it for the artists, not for the corporate people, but or the other collectors, and because and that's what they cited. So we're trying to get it back, and the issue is the great Congressman, my great friend and my favorite Congressman, John Lewis, is the sponsor of the Artist Museum Partnership Act because he sees it as a freedom of expression issue. Others see it as a business issue. And we have about 100 co-sponsors in the House, and Senator Leahy sponsors it in the Senate. And it's just a numbers game now. It's getting the numbers up to have enough to pass it in the House and Senate. And this particular coming year, because of all of the re-looking at tax issues that's going to be happening, is an opportunity year.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Congressman Lewis, he's a phenomenal individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. We'll go
Hi,
here.
my name is Maya. I'm a violist and a composer, and I have a question for Carla about the project that you are doing in March. Is it going to happen again? Is it going to be like an annual thing? And how can I get in on that? I'm kidding.
Gosh, well, email me.
Okay.
Carla@thecanalesproject.com. I'd love to hear from all of you, and thank you. It means a lot to me that you're interested.
Yeah.
This will be our first debut is in March at the National Gallery of Art in DC, 3 o'clock, free concert, if any of you are there. We do have plans to do it in San Jose in May, and hopefully a lot more. So I would absolutely love to speak with you. Please drop me a line or find me afterward.
I also have a follow-up question. With the women that you spoke to, how many of them were non-binary or transgender women? Like, is it, was it sectionality,
We looked to be as inclusive as possible across the board in all aspects. And by this, I mean not just sexual identity, but also like age range and the genres of music, like everything. We just really wanted to have as much diversity as possible within the honoree women as well as within the composer women. And so for that reason too, we didn't specifically say, okay, we want this amount or that amount. We really just opened our doors. And that was what I think was the most beautiful, was trying to celebrate what do we all have in common rather than really segmenting it into, I want to check my boxes here and check my boxes there. But I'm very proud to say we have just such a beautiful diversity within the full group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just to tag on, we have Kelly Hansen tuning in, and she said, Carla, how do you measure success of what you do, what you're doing with your program?
I think about that question a lot. I'm someone who's very metrics driven. And I want to take a moment and also say that Bob has been a mentor and a dear friend to me. I'm quite humbled and honored and a little shy to be on the stage with him because he's taught me so much of what I try to put into practice every day. But I think one metric of success that comes to mind is if I can share an idea with a group or an individual, and then that idea stays with them when I'm not there and impacts them in a way that will create positive change. Absolutely. Maybe it makes them reflect twice. Maybe it makes them hold the door open for someone else. Maybe it makes them explore a certain musical thing. I don't know what it is, but that to me is probably the ultimate success.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Good morning. Charles Babatou Murphy, St. Louis, Missouri, career and technical education teacher. About 10 years ago, Carla, Me and one other teacher and about 17 students sat in the mayor's office, and we formed Our Voices TV. And I'm still in touch with the alumni, and we would like to borrow your model and get various people to send us their little write-up about them and then turn them into music and broadcast it. So I want to stay in touch with you on
Please
that.
stay in touch. Yeah,
Okay.
that's so inspiring. Thank you.
And as far as Bob, I'm also one of the building stewards in my building for AFT Local 420 in St. Louis, and we really want to get some ideas about how we can help forge alliances and so forth to get arts back in the schools. And in particular, I also work at the National Blues Museum in St. Louis, and I'm interning my students in that. But we did have an issue. We have artists who do all types of art, sculpture, painting, etc. But the musicians themselves are artists, and they create the music. So I want to get some ideas from you how we can work between the museum and the artists, to support each other, because as cool as St. Louis is and the blues, we're still having trouble making sure that the National Blues Museum can really grow.
So a quick thing, I had the opportunity, I go to a different city every week, have for the last 30 years, and I was in St. Louis this year, and I went to the Blues Museum. Fabulous, and great harmonica exhibit there.
Yes.
And the other thing I'll just point out related to your union connection is that there would be no National Endowment for the Arts if it wasn't for the AFL-CIO. And that's because about 10 years, 15 years into, first of all, they were there at the beginning, and then about 15 years into, when we were battling against charges that the arts were pornographic or blasphemous, the two organizations that were the most powerful voices up there were not the arts organizations, although everybody was pushing. It was the AFL-CIO and the United States Conference of Mayors. Very powerful statements. And, but it's an illustration, to your point, of collaboration and connection. Individual artists and these organizations working together has to happen not just in times of crisis. It has to be an ongoing coalition building. And I think that's probably the key. Many other things, but often what happens is that we think we can't do anything. That's why I used that one vote example earlier. And on the question about success measures, for advocacy, failure is often an incremental success. But people see that, hey, we made it 90% or 99.5%. We didn't get that last vote. They give up, as opposed to saying, hey, we're almost there. Let's build the coalition a little bit stronger. Let's put one more ad out. Let's stand in the lines a little bit longer. And it takes leadership to make that happen. Those are some thoughts.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good morning. My name is Alfonso Pollard. I am the Legislative Political Director for the American Federation of Musicians, which is the Musicians Union. First of all, I want to thank both panelists, especially Bob, for this session. It's critically important. Arts advocacy is extremely important. And we work very closely with Americans for the Arts on a regular basis. We, too, are a grassroots organization in which our members not only express their voices and opinions through advocacy, but also support our Legislative Action Fund. So we support members of Congress throughout the year. What's critically important about our being here is that we are here to support Sphinx. A number of staff people are here now. Our diversity committee is here. I'm also a member of the director of diversity for the AFM. And we are extremely, extremely happy to see so many people and so many voices expressing their opinions about minorities in the arts. So we're going to continue to work and do everything that we can do to support Sphinx and to support advocacy. And Bob, I want to thank you for all the great things you're doing. We're looking forward to Arts Advocacy Day. We are a sponsor this year. We just want to, again, let everybody know. The AFM is usually a landing place for many of the people who are here in the room, whether you're joining a symphony orchestra or just doing professional work in your communities. Many people here actually become members of the AFM. So we've been around since 1896, and we've been fighting a good fight on Capitol Hill as well. And I just wanted to let you know that we are here as a resource. And again, we want to thank everybody on the stage for what they're doing. And Bob, we'll see you in March.
Yes, you will. Can I just tell a story about you?
Depends on the story.
About 15 years ago, or 20 now, when we were in the middle of the battle for the life of the arts and funding for the arts, different artists wanted to help us. One was the artist Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary. That's where I first started using with him, just different folk songs from the protest era as part of what we would sometimes have. And he wanted to do a concert on the steps of the Capitol. Now that scares me more than anything, because the Capitol steps are so big, and a concert or that kind of protest could be so small, and I often like to see the energy focused into an office or to a legislator. But he said, no, it'll be okay. And so it was him, a couple of other people, and you brought a chorus, a wonderful chorus, and some other musicians to back him up, and we started to perform, and I still wasn't sure what was going to happen. And then Senator Kennedy showed up, and then another senator showed up, and another senator, and Congress people. And because of combination of the union, that strength, and Peter Yarrow, who had worked as an artist with many of these people, we had half of Congress there out on the steps of the Capitol singing with all of us. That's the power of you as artists, but it's the power of coalition with great organizations like the union. So thank you again.
Thanks, Bob.
Great.
And Bob, I was wondering if you would mind sharing a little bit as we talk about specific tools, that people can take, those next steps in connecting to phenomenal organizations like Americans for the Arts. Can you share just briefly, about Arts Advocacy Day that's been mentioned a couple of times, and potentially the opportunity for folks in this room to join you?
Sure. So there is a National Arts Advocacy Day that happens every year, usually in March. And about 750 people came last year for National Arts Advocacy Day. There's a day of training. There is, on Monday night, there's an inspirational lecture. It was Darren Walker last year from the Ford Foundation, but it's been Yo-Yo Ma or different artists in the past, artists or business leaders or government leaders. And 2,000 people will come to that. And then a combination of those 750 and those 2,000 the next day will come up to Capitol Hill. We'll do a 2-hour kickoff breakfast that gets about 50 Congress leaders to come through. Leaders from state arts advocacy organizations from all around the country are there as well. And there are 100 national, or actually, I always round up, 87 national arts service organizations and other supporting organizations that are on the back of this book, which is the spiral book that everybody gets when they come to Advocacy Day. We hit 400 offices last year, and it makes a difference. Now, it's not, you can't just stop there. You have to do little bits like that throughout the year, but it makes a big difference. And in terms of tools, this is a great tool, because in this book are all the issue briefs that we want. I've talked about the NEA, there's 2 pages on that. I've talked about the Artist Museum Partnership Act, there's 2 pages on that. What do we want? What are the arguments? And then there are facts and figures, a lot of the research that different colleague organizations do and that we do. And then my very favorite thing, which makes this the most feared book in Washington. Actually, I hope it will be someday. It's not right yet. But it's the arts support records of every member of Congress.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
How did they vote? So a congressperson can tell you when you go into their office, I love the arts, and you can say, but you've got a C- record, ma'am. And we know the votes. So those are some tools.
Yeah.
That's what Arts Advocacy Day is, and that's been going on now for 30 years.
Yeah, and it's a great experience for anybody, whether you've advocated before or not. There's 101 tracks, there's those for the most experience, and We, from the state of Michigan, we're proud to bring a delegation every single year. I serve as our state captain, and I've never been a captain of anything in my life, so it's my one chance to be a captain. And then in the state of Michigan, if you're from Michigan and you're here, that we are reviving our Arts Advocacy Day for the state of Michigan. It's the first time we're going to do it in over 10 years, so it's been a decade since we've done it here. But to kind of wrap up this conversation, and in knowing that advocacy is so broad, there are so many places that we could take this conversation. We could sit here for hours, and I would love to sit here for hours with the two of you. But to really take a look at it, I think that it's really important to notice that that people who are working in this field, that there's so many. Bob, you constantly talk about the arts in healthcare, the arts in military, all those different pieces. But the two of you on this stage are really phenomenal examples of people who are making such a difference in the world in which we're here to talk about today. But you're also phenomenal artists in your own right. That you definitely, I wanted to hand it off to you and wonder, maybe if you'd be willing to close out our session here today with maybe a few strands on the piano and a few things.
All right.
All right.
So,
Just happened to find this on my
actually, we were talking ahead about the fact that walking into a congressional office and having somebody like me make a case is one thing, and then having it illustrated by an actual artist who has made a career and affected a lot is also very, very powerful. And I was just hearing about, or just talking with Alfonso as we were talking there, and it reminded me of that day on Capitol steps where Peter Yarrow was the artist. And Peter also would come with us to different venues, the American Association of Bankers, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, Congress, different places like that. And one of the things he used to do is that I'd be talking with him, and I would make a case about the value of the arts, and he'd then nudge me aside, and he'd play a little Puff the Magic Dragon. And you could see the bankers start to sing the words, because everybody knows that. And then I would talk about arts education, and he would sing a song called Don't Laugh at Me, which is about bullying. And everybody's been bullied in some way, and so you see people tearing up. Then I would talk about the value of the arts in community advancement, and he would push me aside and start to play This Land Is Your Land, and then you'd see all the bankers and all the mayors and everybody sort of get into it and stand up and start singing. So we thought, hey, what the heck? It was great that Alfonso's here. We'll try that one. We've had no practice, no rehearsal. We don't even know if the piano is tuned, but we're going to give it a try. So.
And most importantly, I hope you guys will join us. It's a song that I hope you all love and you know. And in the spirit of collaboration, let's start our Friday morning off with some beauty.
This land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me.
As I was walking
down
that ribbon highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. This land is your land. This land is my land.
From California to the New York Island,
from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts. And all around me, a voice was sounding.
This
land, it was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land, it was made for you and me.
As I was walking,
I saw a sign there.
on the other side, it said no trespassing. But on the back side, it didn't say nothing. That sign, it was made for you and me. This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the redwood forest and the Gulf Stream waters. This land, it was made for you and me.
Thank you all very much.